So I'm looking forward to this panel. So Brandon Mulder, our energy journalism fellow in the Energy Institute, is going to moderate. Brandon, I'll let you introduce your panelists, but it's really a highlight of the Phases and Stages podcast that Andy Uhler, our energy reporter in residence, is. It's really a passion. He's definitely not doing it for the money. Let me just put it that way. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Yes, hello. Like Brian said, my name is Brandon Mulder. I'm an energy journalism fellow at the UT Energy Institute. And I think we should have a fun panel for you all. So starting from the furthest end, we have Caitlin Smith, who is Senior Vice President of Federal and Regulatory Affairs at the battery developer Jupiter Power. And then we have David Spence, Professor of Energy Regulation at the UT Law School. And Andy Uhler, reporter in residence at the Energy Institute. And so Andy is the host and producer, is that right?
Host, producer, editor, yeah. Yeah, it's a one-man show.
Yeah, of Phases and Stages. So to start us off, we've got a clip from his most recent episode, which takes us to Crest, Texas, which I believe, I Googled it this morning, between Lubbock and Abilene, smack dab, right?
Between Lubbock and Amarillo.
Amarillo, okay.
Yeah.
So I think as they cue that up, why don't you just go ahead and set us up?
Yeah, so Crest came into my my radar because for a minute, we're building solar very quickly here in Texas, and we're building solar quickly in the United States. For a minute, Crest, Texas was home to the largest solar farm in the nation. Repsol had decided in 2024, actually decided before, but they broke ground in 2024 to build this 637 megawatt giant solar farm. And if you go out there, ask them for drone footage, like it is 6.5 square miles. It is so, I couldn't put it into words how impressive and how large it is. But it's also, the population of this town is 592, so they have more power, more megawatts of power than residents, right? And so for me it was, okay, how does this factor into community life? How does this giant, massive solar farm affect the people who live out there? And so I asked the mayor about it.
The taxes don't come to the city. City gets nothing out of it. Those taxes go to the school districts. We get nothing out of it. We have nothing to do with it. We have no say over it. All we can hope is it's done the right way and support the decisions of those that made the decision to have those farms.
So that's a guy named Johnny Taylor. He's the mayor of Crest. He wasn't mad. Like, he wasn't mad about it, but he was delightfully honest and candid with me about the way that the tax abatements had worked and had been established. All that money was going to the school district, right? It was Chapter 313 in Texas that got phased out in 2022. But they had opted into this tax abatement program that would basically fund the school for 10 years, and it would cap the amount of tax they were paying on the property taxes of that establishment for 10 years. And from his perspective, he didn't get to use any of that money to repair the roads or do anything like that. And so you can kind of hear his tone is like, well, it doesn't do anything for us. We have nothing to do with it. And I reached out to the superintendent of the schools. She agreed to talk for a minute, and then I think she figured out what I was up to. So then she backed out. But it's really interesting because when you talk to folks in Crest and when you talk to folks in that area, they're really not feeling those direct benefits. And so I wanted that's been the through line to so many of the different episodes has been, does it have to be cash? I don't know. Does it have to be, how do you sort of compel, and David, you and I have talked about this too, how do you compel folks to understand that these infrastructure projects actually are benefiting them if there aren't direct economic benefits of the projects?
Yeah, we don't compel them to understand, but hopefully we persuade them to understand. If I was a parent in Crest and I heard him say it's going to the school district, our town gets nothing out of it, I might say, well, we get something out of it, right? I mean, but it's true. In his budget, he gets nothing out of it, and that's kind of a common problem for citing any kind of energy infrastructure, which is that a lot of the costs of the project fall on locals, and a lot of the benefits of the project go elsewhere. Now, not all of them, right? But the bulk of them go elsewhere. And so the local community feels as though they're being asked to sort of bear the burden for somebody else's benefit. And the way we the way developers try to deal with that generally is through these community benefit agreements that you alluded to, which hopefully will make transparent benefits that the developer's willing to share with the host community. Now, in the oil and gas business, or even when you're building a data center, those are industries that have much bigger margins. They have lots of cash. They have more money to use to try and create those community benefits that are transparent and tangible. In the electricity generation business, the margins are small. And so often they don't have as much leeway to create that kind of sort of big splash that shows the community that they're benefiting. But they do benefit eventually from tax revenues, from lower spot prices in the power market, and a variety of other things. Our colleague Josh Rhodes has shown that in a couple of studies that he's done. And so, but making that front and center for locals is sometimes a real challenge.
So Andy, I want to jump back to you. Sure. Your reporting throughout this series has taken you across the state, from Permian Basin to the Gulf Coast.
Yep.
Have you seen communities respond differently to these same kinds of issues?
Yeah, no, it's super interesting because it's not even really necessarily even political. For me, if I'm going to Alice, Texas, in Central Texas, and I'm talking to folks there, their concerns are just kind of inherently going to be different. So I'm sitting down with people and I'm asking them what they're worried about, right? I tell people all the time, it's like, I have one question. It's like, what are you guys worried about here? And the response that I'm getting from folks in Matagorda County is totally different from the response that I'm getting from folks in Alice or up in the Panhandle. And so what's really interesting too, what was super interesting about the Cress episode, about the Great Plains, one of my sources was like, we don't think about this stuff very politically out here. We think of it very sort of practically, which spending a little bit of, I spent a week out there, and he was right. The way that they talk about this sort of stuff in West Texas, it really didn't feel like it sort of fell through political lines. It was really kind of like, well, what is this going to do for our community? Is this going to be good for my neighbors? And it's so interesting, the sort of community, the way that communities come together to either really support this stuff or really be mad about it. In West Texas specifically, it feels like, it's like, all right, what is this going to do for all of us, right? Mm-hmm.
And so, Caitlin, as a developer, Jupiter has several assets scattered throughout West Texas and various counties. How do y'all deal with getting that social license in the first place? Is there a process? Is it different for every community?
There's a process, and I would say I think I agree with Andy, especially maybe until recently everywhere in Texas, but still in West Texas, I don't think it's very political, right? I don't think when you go to a local community, you see opposition in Texas for the sake of opposition, right? It's usually an actual concern and sort of the Texas is open for business thing, right? Sure. You're bringing money to my area, to my school district, or eventually tax revenues, great, bring us some money. There's a process. Texas has been pretty developer friendly. We use a very proactive process, and that seems to work for us better than I think maybe some other developers. Try to get in there, ask the same questions, right? What are your concerns, and how can we alleviate those? With batteries, fire safety is a concern really for everybody. So we bring in the national experts. We kind of work with the local responders. We train them once, and then we train them every year. And so we're just really proactive about that.
And do these conversations happen like at the county level, at the city councils, or just throughout? Are you holding town halls?
That's pretty project dependent or locality dependent. Texas, compared to other states, is pretty light on local permitting requirements.
David, go ahead.
I was going to ask a follow-up. So,
sure.
Is it more partisan elsewhere?
Yes.
Because the political, I read a lot of the political science stuff because that's what I do, and we're starting to see party identity sort of starting to influence behavior, the turn of the Republican Party, which has been very sharp against renewables in the last 8 years, according to polling anyway, manifest in these bans. Something like 755 counties now have bans on renewables development, not in Texas, but elsewhere. And I'm wondering if, what is it about Texas that makes it less partisan than you see elsewhere?
Locally, yes. I think, right, I came straight from our state house. It's pretty partisan there.
Sure.
But when you get in a local community, a really red district, are you seeing a ban for the sake of a ban? In Texas, no. In a red county in Michigan, are you? Yes. And so I do think much less so. Maybe this is reflective of me, but I tend to think it's just sort of the more like free market mindset, right? Like you want to come do business here and you're going to bring me money, come do business here and bring me money. Mm-hmm. But I could be wrong. I think it's sort of shifting a little bit to more political on the local levels, but I think it is less political on the local level than other states.
And David, you and I had talked about you created this really nice sort of bifurcation in the poli-sci space where the sort of economic benefits or
our partisan identity. That's sort of, so when political scientists argue about why the parties are polarized, they point to a bunch of different things, but sort of the two of the big ones are the fact that most of the places where politicians run for office are either solidly Democrat or solidly Republican, so that they don't really face much risk of losing a general election against the other party. Where they do run the risk of losing their job next time around is in the primary election. So they stop worrying about pleasing the average voter and they start worrying about pleasing the average primary voter. And the average primary voter in both parties tends to be much more the activists who are more ideologically extreme and more what we would call now negatively partisan, meaning they really dislike the other party. The data on negative partisanship is extremely alarming. How much the active partisans hate each other is crazy. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is sort of the internet, which amplifies all that negativity. And so we're starting to see this sort of sharp turn in national polling anyway against renewable energy, which we then think of as one of the drivers of all this opposition, these zoning bans on renewable energy development, which wouldn't have been an option in Crest because I don't think they're big enough to have home rule. So he's sort of saying, what can I do about it? Yep. If he had zoning power, he might have done something.
Sure.
About it. Yeah.
So Caitlin, you mentioned a minute ago that in Texas it might be at the local level edging towards that partisanship, in the face of projects like that. Why do you think that is? Is that just?
I think maybe, and maybe the internet, right? I think what you're saying is really interesting. I think in Texas, we have a big house. A lot of them have rural districts. I think you might see them on the news or in the Capitol saying very partisan things, but when they go home to their district and they have landowners, I think they listen to them. It's sort of the opposite of federally, right? I think our House kind of behaves not super partisan-ish now in voting and things, and the Senate leans really right, but I think that's maybe the opposite of what we see federally and what we see in other states. The internet's a thing, Facebook's a thing, and opposition groups, but I think we're still less partisan locally. I lost my train of thought because I got distracted by the things you were saying.
It's also, and I think you're speaking to this too, Caitlin, sort of the idea of there's something wonderful about the democratization of the media and information and things like that. But at the same time, if everybody has a microphone and everybody can say whatever they want to say.
Oh.
Go ahead.
The point I was going to make was different, though. I think actually the oil and gas and industries like that in Texas have helped, right? Because there's this idea that I'm not telling you what you do with your property. There's a neighbor idea, but there's also the sort of property rights idea, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can do whatever you want on your land to make money. And so if I want to have a wind farm to send my kids to college, I think that's been a really strong driver in Texas.
Okay.
And to be fair, the dynamics of opposition are exactly the same if you're talking about fracking or solar farms or wind farms.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's often some farmer makes a lot of money and the neighbors don't.
Yeah.
And they're upset, and that gives them that heightens the fact that they're just bearing costs and not getting benefits. Same thing with a wind farm, same thing with a solar farm.
And you're right. It's and I remember I said this in one of the episodes, but it's like you're sitting at a cafe and it's old school jealousy, right? Like, and that's okay. But if you have, if you're sitting next to somebody who's drinking coffee at the same cafe you are, and they have 40,000 acres where developers are, knocking at their door every day, and you have 3 acres, and you're just sort of watching them make a whole lot of money, you're bummed out, and that's okay. Like, for me, the whole project, going to listen to people have real emotion and have real response to this, like that is the fact that the university and the Energy Institute lets me do this. It's like, it's incredible. It really
you
is.
also listen to that series. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yesterday we heard from Ning Lin, who kind of talked about how for this data centers especially, how community readiness, she says it's now an imperative and not just like a nice to have. Mm-hmm. And a couple weeks ago during Sarah Week, I also heard about how NIMBYism is kind of evolving into bananaism, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere.
Near anyone.
So I mean, like, is near anywhere, is like the kind of oppositional attitude strengthening when you're kind of faced with these?
It's strengthening. I think we still see it much less in Texas and in other states.
Right. Yeah.
I think when I think about the projects we've had the most opposition on, they're Pacific Northwest, and I would characterize it as true NIMBYism. In Texas, I think it's strengthening. Especially with data centers, and I was thinking about this when we talked about Crest, Texas, right? The community gets benefits. It doesn't go entirely elsewhere, but it goes not just to them, right? It's sort of like a grid-wide or at least regional-wide benefit. And so I think there's this idea of why do you have to be here? But that's really true with data centers because with a solar farm or a battery, it's there because the land is there, the resource is there, the connection to electric infrastructure is there. Data centers, they'd be looking for the land and the connection to electric infrastructure, but it's really like this is what we call non-native load, right? You don't need to be here. You're not a hospital. Yep. Like, why are you here? And maybe your demand response helps the grid and maybe other things. But I think the community feels really like, why us?
And it is really interesting in West Texas, being out in especially in the Panhandle, talking to folks. You're exactly right. It was the only enemies we have really are in Austin and San Antonio and Dallas and Houston. Like, everybody else is great, but why take all of this? Why build this infrastructure here to benefit those folks, those city folk, right? We live on the frontier, and yet y'all are posting up here and benefiting all of those city folk. I mean, that's a real thing.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say whether local opposition is, like it is most of the time in Texas, really about real concerns about distribution of costs and benefits, or in other places where it's starting to be about sort of oppositional identity to this industry because it's associated with the left. That changes your strategy as sort of your community engagement strategy, I would think, in a big way. It's not just about providing benefits. There's a couple of books out that I would recommend. One by Suzanne Mettler and Trevor Brown, called Rural versus Urban, brand new. And another book called Uncertain Futures by Gez Marian and somebody else about siting renewable energy in rural areas. Those are both, for people that are crafting their community engagement strategy, I think they would both be really useful in the opposite way. So one's about the economic argument and getting benefits to people, and the other one's about this identity question and how to sort of crack that idea of sort of just reflexive oppositional behavior.
Yeah. So the engagement plan is different, and we try to hire somebody local each time, right? Local communications firm, local law firm, and so you have people who really understand the community.
And do y'all think there's a way in which this is ultimately shaping the politics around? I mean, I know we've kind of touched on this a few times, but maybe we can zero in on that question. How the extent to which a community is able to tangibly feel those benefits and what their overall politics and at a national or local level is towards those projects or renewable energy in general?
Well, the point about rural alienation from basically Democrats, to put it, which is a documented phenomenon, is about being economically left behind, all the growth being in cities, people leaving the rural communities to go to cities, and lack of investment in these rural communities, or the public goods types of investments that people try are really geared towards cities and suburbs and don't really fit in the rural context all that well. And so there's just a sense that these people look down on us, and that's what political scientists would say is driving that type of alienation. I don't know how you fold that into renewable energy engagement, but that's what they would say.
The other thing you learn too, David, going out there is there's a lot of sort of history and tradition. And when I go to Matagorda County and I talk to rice farmers out there, first of all, it's like, why are y'all farming rice out here? We've been doing it forever. But also, you can hear folks lamenting that their kids don't want to be farmers. Yeah. And they also say, I don't blame them for not being farmers. It's really hard work, and they probably should move to Austin and get a job doing whatever they want to do. But you can also sense that it's a bummer.
It's sad, yeah.
It's sad because their whole history, their family history, you talk to people who have been in Texas, in this part of Texas, for hundreds of years, and they've had this land forever, and they know that their kids are gonna sell it immediately when they pass on. And so there's real sadness just about not sort of upholding family history. I mean, it's real when you talk to folks. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yet sometimes these leases are a lifeline for farms and ranches, and even then sometimes they say no. And maybe it's about worrying about the panels being left behind if somebody goes bankrupt. I don't know what exactly it is, but my wife's grandfather's farm in Delaware, which was just barely getting along, about a third of the farm, a solar developer came to them and said, we'll lease a third of your acreage and we'll pay you $80,000 a year, which was more than he was clearing on that farm. And they said no. And it was just, everyone around him was saying no. They all had, in the community, it just was this thing that you just don't do.
Why did they say no?
I mean, they talk about things like losing farmland. And sense of place and the character of the community. But as an economically self-interested decision, it didn't seem
They might even feel like they're stewards of that land and sort of feel that kind of commitment to it.
That is something that comes into play, not necessarily politics, but sort of how they feel about the land, right? If you're in a historically agricultural place, it might not be political, but they may have a bias against wind and solar. Wind, takes thousands of acres, solar takes hundreds of acres. It's a little bit easier for us because we could build a big battery resource on 8 acres, but we have to kind of come in and talk through the sort of negative perception of you're going to take all our land from us that is, agricultural or historical or scenic,
But being in touch with somebody in the local community too, and having a local steward there has to be I joke with people all the time, when I go to rural Texas, I am from Fort Worth. I don't live in Austin of course I tell them if they ask me, but I talk about being from Fort Worth, and I have a lot more of an accent when I'm talking to folks in Lubbock than I do when I'm in Austin. Just because that's a really important, it works, but it's also a really important part of the connection that you're making with the community. If you're parachuting in from New York and working for a venture fund and trying to buy a whole bunch of land to build whatever, they're gonna have a different reaction to you.
So I wanted to see if we can maybe shift gears a little bit to maybe talk about policy. Maybe we can go into sort of the federal and state backdrops for renewable energy. Obviously Texas has seen incredible growth in the renewable sector for a couple decades now. But those tax credits were recently eliminated, or at least they're going to sunset sooner than later. Do y'all think that this will put a damper on Texas's growth, or do you think kind of the cat's already out of the bag? there's so much momentum behind it that it's hard to really stop that growth, and investments will just kind of keep pouring into ERCOT.
What do you think?
And wind and solar?
Yeah.
I think wind seems to be slowing down,
Yeah.
but solar, I think the cat's out of the... I think it'll maybe slow things, but I think there's momentum in both of those directions regardless, right? I think wind development was already slowing down. I think solar development will continue to be strong. You know, batteries sort of were not impacted tax credit-wise, so I don't always remember the details for wind and solar. There's still an amount of time to start construction, so we may see, you know, kind of a rush of solar come online, which is sort of an interesting unintended consequence, because we have a lot of solar already.
In the queue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Solar, I mean, if you believe the Lazard numbers, solar unsubsidized and wind unsubsidized, at least in certain places, is still very, very competitive.
Yeah.
You heard from Dan, earlier, right?
And,
yeah.
We had a conference in February in which we had somebody from the Solar Energy Industries Association. You were there, Andy. And she said, we don't even want tax credits anymore. We're tired of fighting over tax credits. We think we can compete, you know, straight up.
Right.
And you know, the sort of flip-flopping on tax credits just gets in the way of us being treated as a sort of stand on your own 2 feet resource. I don't know if that was PR or if she was sincere, but it
I don't know if
struck
that's
me.
the position they took when they were lobbying.
Right. But Caitlin, from your perspective, the conversation more and more is certainly with solar. It's solar and batteries, and it's right. I mean,
Can be, yeah.
It feels like in my reporting anyway, the more that I'm hearing is that batteries are sort of we need this to be a part of the way that we're thinking about the future.
Yes.
Does that, to your question, if policy is affecting ramping, I don't know, you tell me.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit indirect, right? It's sort of a cop-out answer, but there's a lot of things that go into an investment decision. I think obviously they're highly complementary. In Texas, it's been really helpful to have batteries because we have so much solar come online, and so I think probably everyone here knows this, but you used to be using the most amount of energy, you know, at 2 p.m. between 2 and 5. Because you're running your ACs, but now there's all this solar on, but still hot when the sun sets. So the problem time is sort of when the sun sets. So it's helpful to have the batteries then. Would we build batteries, you know, if that weren't the case? Maybe not. I think there's a lot of factors. I think, you know, using ERCOT as an example, batteries used to provide mostly what's called ancillary services, so kind of special services based on our speed. You're seeing them increasingly in energy, I think a lot because of that gap when the sun sets. But there's a lot of things they can do, right? As we have 4-hour batteries in ERCOT, that's longer than the gap. I think initially you were seeing people build batteries in West Texas, and I think that's really a complement to the solar. Now you're seeing them build them in cities, which I think is a complement to congestion created by load and transmission. Will you see different investment due to data centers? Because batteries can certainly help with, you know, the power they need as well as the power quality. And so I think it's a little bit too hard to draw that direct line.
Chairman Garza made that point about flexibility being the watchword of the future, and batteries are a big part of that. But just for people that don't know, one of the national labs did a deep analysis of the interconnection queue a couple of years ago, and in places where there was already saturation of solar or already saturation of wind, almost huge majorities of the projects in the queue were coupled with batteries. And that just makes sense, I think.
Yeah. So coupled is interesting. Co-located, previously, like pre-IRA, the batteries could only get a tax credit if you were co-located with solar.
Right.
So you were sort of seeing some co-location in order to get a tax credit for your battery. But that sort of was behaving as a less flexible resource, right? That was just sort of solar plus a couple of hours or an hour.
Right.
And so now maybe are you seeing the opposite? You're just adding some solar to where you were going to build a battery project. I don't know. We don't do co-located. We sort of have a theory about helping congestion, whether it be in West Texas or in urban areas. We've announced a couple of projects in major cities. We have one in Boston in a couple years. We have one that's been commercial for a couple years in city of Houston. So we sort of have this theory of it really helping kind of congestion and load pockets, right? Sort of almost a transmission replacement. And so that's just something different than maybe a batteries plus solar.
So it was sort of token battery edition, or it felt like that when you're going after that tax credit, I guess.
For other people,
For
I
the
think.
co-location, yeah.
So when you say
Well,
like
it's just a different way to
Right.
operate the resource, right?
Yeah.
If to get that tax credit, you did have to charge from the solar.
Yeah.
So it was a different, I think that's different than what we're talking about as kind of a flexible resource. That's
Yeah.
just sort of a solar plus an hour.
Yep.
I'm also kind of wondering generally like how tied renewable growth is to battery growth. So like if one slows down, will the other, or do you think that there's just so much catching up to do that battery has to do that you won't really even feel that in any kind of immediate or medium term?
So the battery growth, I think, certainly has been tied to renewable growth, right? I think you see it in Texas. It's based on market fundamentals, right? Because a battery, you're going to put it somewhere where there's a big price differential. And that's going to be somewhere where it's really windy or really sunny, because when those resources are online, there's really low price. When they're not online, there's really high price. So the batteries kind of follow the market. And somewhere like California, it comes through via policy, right? They have policy in place for all this solar to come online. Oh crap, we need a firm resource, and then they put policy in place for storage to come online. So I think we've seen the storage follow the renewables. I don't think you can probably draw a straight line anymore, just because of all the use cases. If you were to somehow see batteries stop growing, you'd probably need to think about, do we have too much wind now or too much solar now? Mm-hmm. But I think that would be more of a kind of policy decision.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was just going to make a distinction, and maybe you did this and I just didn't pick it up, but make a distinction between batteries as sort of complementary to variability among renewables, sort of moment to moment or over the course of a day, versus batteries as either a transmission replacement or, as they're trying to do in California, and maybe this is what you were trying to say, or did say well, and I just didn't pick it up, as ultimately they'd like it to be a big part of their firm resource when wind and solar aren't there.
Right.
I think here in Texas, because our ancillary service market is, or can be relatively lucrative, I imagine that, that's also a big driver of growth of batteries here. So anyway,
Yeah, I sort of skipped over it, but yes. So I think the ancillary service market can be lucrative. It's increasingly less so because it's sort of saturated. But yeah, you sort of explained what I skipped over. Originally, you were seeing batteries more in ancillary services, so sort of firming the kind of power quality, the variability. Increasingly, you're seeing them in energy, so meaning filling the kind of solar, sunset gap,
gaps,
in Houston if a transmission line is down or something. And so you're already kind of seeing a shift towards maybe the filling of the gaps of energy.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about Texas state policy backdrop. Are there any certain things on your radar? I know, like you mentioned already, sort of some of the safety standards that are being produced, but are there other things that could impact growth or things that you're paying attention to?
Yeah, so battery specific, last session we ran two and passed successfully two battery energy storage related bills. A safety bill was based on the national standards, and then a decommissioning bill. I think it was just sort of time in the growth of the industry in Texas, and show we're a partner with the the Capitol and with the communities, and that we're going to kind of adhere to these practices as far as fire safety and decommissioning. In many cases, we were already adhering to those, but I think it was sort of a good act to make sure everybody's living up to those standards.
Yeah. Do you feel that Texas is, pro-developer ethos, is also sort of bequeathed to battery and renewables?
What was the last part of the question?
We talk about all the time about how, Texas has a pro-development.
Open for business,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Open for business.
yeah, and for pipelines or for data centers or for whatever it is.
Sure.
Do you feel like do you feel the same benefits in your line of business?
So far, I think
Okay.
so. I think there has been some. We talked a lot about local. There's been significant state opposition to renewable development. There's been a very, punitive bill on renewable development the last 2 sessions. Batteries have never been in that bill, and part of why we went to the Capitol and said we want to run a fire safety bill is so we could kind of have that conversation separately, right?
Sure.
We're here to work with the communities and permit responsibly and develop responsibly. But the renewable permitting bill has been successfully defeated, largely in part of the kind of property owner rights argument, right? This is my land. If I don't have the 80 grand to send my kids to college, and putting a wind farm on my property does that, I should be able to do that without the state telling me I can't.
Right. Okay. I think at this point we can maybe start collecting questions if anyone has anything they want to share.
I already have 3. So if you have a question, write on a card. I think we have Monique can come grab it. Just let her know.
But I think, as people are kind of thinking, maybe one last one to tie it back to the pod.
Sure.
So you've been across the state. What are some of your lessons learned?
Yeah.
What are you going to head into for your next series?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because the sort of the next episode, the sort of concluding episode of this season, and this season was all about location, right? I was going to different places and I was trying to get a sense of what folks were talking about. I think it's really important to sort of think, and this is why we have this panel here, right? To think about how politics and what happens in Austin affects people in Lubbock, in Matagorda County, in El Paso. And I think giving them voice to express that they know that happens and they're feeling the effects of what legislators are doing here in town, but also those of us at the university, what we're studying and what we're talking about sort of does dictate a lot of policy and does dictate a lot of sort of what people in those, especially rural places, are feeling. And so the sort of wrap-up episode is going to be, we're going to be talking to legislators and we're going to be talking to different folks here in Austin. I talked to David about this too. Sort of the consequences of what happens here, changing the world, certainly changing what happens in different parts of Texas. And so next season actually is going to be really fun. It's going to be all about innovation. We were talking about this a little bit before, but I'm hoping and thinking that we're going to have a whole lot of startups and a whole lot of industry players, hopefully knocking on my door, hopefully sending me emails, wanting to be profiled because there's so much happening here in Texas and so much development and so much money, honestly, that's being funneled in. That we're going to be, I think, ground zero for the different innovations that are happening in the energy industry. So I'm going to profile a whole lot of different things that we're going to be sort of seeing and hearing about over the next few years.
Okay, great. Awesome.
I have some questions. How to redistribute the profit of those power plants in rural places? Is there a redistribution mechanism in government pipeline? So I actually don't fully. Anyway, I don't know. Is there a way to maybe pass on more benefits locally? Is that something people are thinking about?
There are a couple of people that are writing about this, right, David? We were at a conference and they were talking about pretty literally direct cash benefits. Go ahead.
Beyond property taxes, there's no real limit to the agreements that the developer can make with the local community and the representatives of the local community. It's not always that simple because the local community leaders may represent a majority, but there's always going to be somebody who doesn't like it and has access to the court system. But generally speaking, you can negotiate. You can listen and talk to them and try to find common ground.
How much could the framing of solar PV in rural communities still improve? Example, building solar is like planting a seed with a never-ending harvest season. It's a good idea. PR advertising.
Yeah, somebody from the marketing department.
Yeah, right. There is a lot of talk about raising solar, right? And I don't know how expensive it is, and I don't know how, even when I was out in Lubbock, we were talking about sort of agrivoltaics, which is kind of cute. I don't think it's necessarily all that. There's sort of a little bit of a cottage industry of folks leasing their sheep to go and sort of graze.
Big industry.
Yeah, to go and graze in between solar panels, and then raising them up maybe. But there's real concern about land degradation when it comes to solar too. So, and I think that's real. Like, we don't have those longitudinal studies to look at, and we need them.
Well, was Mary Lou Hastings already here?
She was
Yeah. So she might have talked about West Texas a little bit, and the things they did there to try and change the configuration of solar to protect habitat.
That's right.
Underneath the panels. But yeah, people are creative and they'll find ways.
Well, I think one thing people don't actually know in Texas is that it's a state law. If you put in a solar farm, it's bonded to take down at the end of life the solar panels. So this concern that, you're going to leave all these solar panels on our land, that actually cannot happen in Texas, and I think most people do not know that.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know, Caitlin. I don't know what the story is with batteries. Is there something
Yeah,
similar?
that's the law I was referring to. It's called a decommissioning law, and so it details what kind of bond you need to have with the landowner, and then the agreement for removal. But that's in place for wind, solar, and storage. I think the wind bill was 17, solar bill was probably 19, and we just did the storage bill.
Yeah.
Will bans on I think this is written by a Texan, but will bans on renewable PV or wind projects eventually be held unconstitutional on private property rights grounds?
That's a David.
That
Spence
sounds
question.
that sounds very Texas.
Bans on
It's got to be unconstitutional.
I doubt it, but I was at the big renewables conference here, like in 2000. I want to say 17 or something like that. It must have been 15 or 14. Whenever the Clean Power Plan was being litigated, and I stood up in front of everyone and said it wouldn't be stayed before the rule was finalized, and the next day the court stayed it. And so it was about a room about this size. So I don't predict anymore, but that seems unlikely to me. States can preempt what local governments do. They can undo bans.
Sure.
But on a property rights, that's because state law is more, the local governments are just creatures of the state. But I don't know about property rights overturning that.
Last question. What advice would you give to companies trying to obtain co-use of land with compatible technologies? How to overcome NIMBYism?
What do you think?
No, you have to tell me.
The sort of advice, what advice would I give to firms that are trying to do that? It's go out and honestly partner with the community and develop a Fort Worth, Texas accent.
And do it early.
Do it early.
You can't just show up and say
Listen,
we're developing this.
trust.
You have to go early.
It really does. It feels like even if you are coming from Austin, it feels like you're parachuting in. If you're like, hey, in a week we're going to be doing this, you need to be peppering them with information. And also, David and I talk about this all the time. You have to be the arbiter of that information. They need to be trusting you that the information you're giving them is accurate and real and honest. If they don't, then whomever is feeding them their information, wherever they're getting it, they're going to trust that way more than they're going to trust you. And so establishing that trust of what I'm telling you is actually factually accurate and true, that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. You have to go early. Local consultants really helps.
Yep.
Things like open houses help. Even if it's not required, meeting with kind of all county, local, city government and other people as well. What has worked for us, like I said, fire safety is usually a concern. So we go early and talk to, any and all local first responders before they just hear that there's a battery project showing up, and that works really well.
Buy a new fire truck, right?
Yeah, well, and just collaborative training, right?
Yeah.
This is how it's going to happen. What's the plan that works for us together? That, we're bringing in the national safety experts, you're bringing in your local experts. Let's work on training and a plan together.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. Let's thank the panel again. Thank
Thanks,
you
y'all.
so much.